Welcome back to TESS'S Cryptids. This time, we're going to be looking at the legend of the Gloucester sea serpent. It's a creature that's, well, it's been swimming through imaginations and supposedly the waters off Gloucester, Massachusetts for centuries. So, so is there any truth to the tales? Could there really be a monster lurking out there?
Well, the thing about the Gloucester sea serpent, the really interesting thing, is that the accounts go all the way back to the 1600s, way before like social media and stuff that could get everybody, hyped up about it. We're talking about a time when the ocean was really a vast and uncharted wilderness.
Right, yeah, like stepping back in time. And our first recorded sighting is from 1638. Comes from an Englishman, John Jocelyn. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. He wasn't the first to mention it. The indigenous people of Cape Ann already had stories about a sea serpent in those same waters. They'd been telling them for generations before settlers even arrived.
Yeah, it really makes you think, how people have always tried to make sense of things they don't understand, especially when it comes to the ocean. It's this immense, powerful force, and for so long it was largely unexplored. I mean, who knows what lurked beneath the surface?
Okay, so these early accounts, they kind of lay the foundation for the legend. But things really start to heat up in the 1800s, specifically between 1817 and 1819. It's almost like that period was like the original monster hunting craze.
Oh, yeah, it really was. Like, newspapers were full of reports, and people were traveling to Gloucester just to try and catch a glimpse. There was even a play from 1819. It was called The Sea Serpent, or Gloucester Hoax. Can you imagine that? A sea serpent
Yeah.
on stage? I mean, even back then, people were captivated.
A play. That's incredible. I wonder if it was like a serious play, a thriller, or more of a comedy, making fun of the whole idea of a sea monster.
That's a great question. I'd love to see it, how they portrayed it and what the audience thought about it. I think it would tell us a lot about what people thought about the legend at the time.
Right. Okay, so back to those sightings in the early 1800s. One of the most famous ones happened in August of 1817. This schooner, the Caravan, was sailing along, and suddenly the crew sees this huge creature swimming alongside the boat.
And what's really interesting is that, how much detail there is in their description. They described a head that looked like a snake, a long body with humps, and they even said it was as long as their ship.
Wow. And they were seasoned sailors, right? They were seeing all kinds of marine life. So for them to be so surprised by it, it must have been something pretty extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know what they did? They fired a cannon at it.
What? They fired a cannon. That's crazy. I mean, what were they thinking? Were they really that scared? Or did they maybe would want to prove that it was real, even if it meant, hurting the creature?
Good question. I think it kind of shows how complicated our relationship with the unknown can be. It could be fear or curiosity or even wanting to feel like you're in control. All those things might influence how we react to something that we don't really understand.
Right. So we had these very detailed descriptions, but even then, there are some differences. Some people said the Gloucester sea serpent looked like a classic sea serpent, long and snake-like. Others described it as more humpbacked, with a head that looked like a horse or a seal. Some even said it looked like a dinosaur.
Yeah, those different descriptions are a big part of the whole debate. The skeptics say, look, if they can't even agree on what it looks like, then maybe they were just seeing things wrong or exaggerating.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, if nobody can agree on what it looks like, how do we know it was even the same creature?
Right, but the people who believe it was real, they say that the ocean is a huge and complex place. What we see on the surface might just be a small part of something much bigger and more mysterious. Maybe its appearance changes depending on how it's moving or the angle you see it from or whatever.
Okay, I see. Like the blind man and the elephant. Each person describes a completely different animal because they only have a small piece of information.
That's a great analogy. And it's a good reminder that even with eyewitness accounts, you can always have different interpretations.
So these accounts, even with the differences, they continue into the 20th century. In fact, around 1980, some experienced fishermen from Gloucester said they saw a creature that fit the description of the sea serpent.
And what's really eerie about this one is that these fishermen, they were really shaken up by it. They weren't looking for fame or attention or anything. These were guys who knew the sea really well, and they described the creature's eyes as, well, they said they were pure evil.
Wow. That's a little creepy, even if you don't believe in sea serpents. It makes you wonder, what did they see that made them feel that way?
It's a good reminder that even today, with all our technology and science, there are still mysteries out there. And some of them might be scarier than we can imagine.
Okay, so we have all these eyewitness accounts, some going back hundreds of years, but how do we make sense of it all? Is there like a scientific way to explain what these people saw?
Well, that's where cryptozoology comes in. It's basically the study of hidden or unknown animals, and the Gloucester sea serpent has always been a big one for them.
Okay, so like real monster hunters, but with like a scientific approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
One of the most important guys in that field was Bernard Heuvelmans. He's kind of considered the father of cryptozoology, and he even wrote a whole section about the Gloucester sea serpent in his book, In the Wake of the Sea Serpents. He looked at all the witness reports, compared them to animals that we already know about, and even came up with some ideas about where it might have come from.
So what did he think it could be? Did he think it was a known animal or something totally new?
He was really careful about saying for sure, but he was really interested in how some details kept popping up in the descriptions, especially the snake-like head and that long humped back. He thought that the Gloucester sea serpent and other sea serpent sightings all over the world could be a group of really big snake-like animals in the sea that haven't been officially discovered yet.
So like a real creature, but we just haven't found it yet. That's exciting and kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows you how much we still don't know about the ocean. I mean, there could be whole groups of animals down there that we've never even seen.
Okay, so we have Hiffelmans, and he's open to the idea of a real sea serpent, but I'm guessing not everyone in the scientific community agrees with that.
Oh, definitely not. Being skeptical is really important in science, and there are some pretty good explanations for those Gloucester sea serpent sightings that don't involve any mysterious creatures.
Like maybe people were just misidentifying something else.
Exactly. The most common theory is that they were actually seeing narwhals.
Narwhals. You mean those whales with the really long tusk. But wouldn't people know if they were looking at a whale?
You'd think so, but the ocean can play tricks on you. Narwhals usually live in really cold waters, but sometimes they go further south. And imagine you see one from far away, maybe in rough seas or when it's foggy or something. That long tusk sticking out of the water could look a lot like a serpent's head and neck, right?
Yeah, I guess so, especially back then when they didn't have cameras or anything to get a clear picture.
Right. And there are even reports where people said they saw a stinger or a spear coming out of the creature's head. Joe Nickel, he's a skeptic. He investigates these kinds of things, and he thinks that this is pretty strong evidence for the narwhal theory.
Okay, so maybe it was just mistaken identity. That makes sense, I guess, but it's still kind of disappointing.
I know, it's just so much more exciting to think about a real sea serpent, something that challenges everything we think we know about nature.
It's like we want to believe in magic, even though we probably know it's just a trick.
Yeah, exactly. But even if it turns out to be a narwhal, that doesn't take away from how powerful the legend is.
Right. It's been part of Gloucester for so long. It's in their art, their logos, even that play from the 1800s.
And that's what's really interesting, I think. It shows how much we're fascinated by the unknown, by trying to explain the mysteries around us, even if it means making up stories about monsters.
It's almost like the stories we tell ourselves are just as important as the real facts. They change how we see things, what we're afraid of, even what we find amazing.
And sometimes those stories can lead to actual discoveries. Think about all the people who went looking for lost cities and mythical creatures. They might not have found exactly what they were looking for, but they found other incredible things along the way.
That's true.
Yeah.
So even if the Gloucester sea serpent isn't real, it still had a real impact on our culture and how we see the natural world.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire future scientists and explorers to keep searching and questioning and never lose that sense of wonder about the world.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Speaking of searching and questioning, let's take a little break from Gloucester and look at some other famous sea serpent stories from around the world. I mean, the Gloucester sea serpent isn't the only one out there, right?
Oh, I'm always up for a good monster story. Where do you want to go first?
How about we go up the coast to the Pacific Northwest? Have you ever heard of Caddy, the Cadborosaurus?
Oh, yeah, Caddy. That one has a long history of sightings. People say it lives in the waters from Alaska all the way down to California.
Right. And the descriptions of Caddy are pretty much the same. They usually say it's long, has lots of humps, and a head that looks like a horse. Some people even say they've caught it on film, but those pictures are always blurry and, well, you can't really tell what you're looking at.
Those fuzzy photos and videos are always interesting, aren't they? They always leave you wondering, could it be real?
Exactly. And with caddy, it's even more mysterious because some people think it might be a plesiosaur. That's like a long-necked marine reptile that supposedly died out millions of years ago.
Wow, wouldn't that be something if those ancient creatures were still alive, hiding somewhere in the ocean?
It's definitely an exciting thought. But let's not forget that there are also some simpler explanations for the caddy sightings. Some scientists think it could be a giant eel, or maybe even a new type of whale that we haven't discovered yet.
It's always important to think about all the possibilities, you know? Look at the evidence and not just jump to conclusions.
Okay, now from the Pacific Northwest, let's hop across the ocean to Scotland, the land of lochs and legends. That's where we find the most famous sea serpent of them all, the Loch Ness Monster, or as everyone calls her, Nessie.
Ah, Nessie. Probably the most famous sea monster in the world. That long neck and those humps have been fascinating people for, well, forever. And the stories about Nessie are amazing.
Oh yeah, from that famous surgeon's photograph to all the sonar readings and people saying they saw her. The debate about whether Nessie is real or not just keeps going.
Huh.
It seems like every few years there's some new evidence that either proves she's real or proves she's not.
And that picture, the surgeon's photo, even though it turned out to be a fake, it really captured people's imaginations, you know? It shows you how powerful a picture can be.
It's like even if we know something's not real, we still kind of want to believe it, you know?
Exactly. And the fact that people are still so fascinated by Nessie, I think it shows how much we want to believe in something beyond the ordinary, something that makes us question everything we thought we knew about nature.
So we've explored Loch Ness, but our sea serpent journey isn't over yet. Let's go a little further north to the waters of Iceland. Have you ever heard of the Lagarflate Sormarin? It's also called the Iceland worm monster.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one to say. But yeah, the Lagarflytormrin is a pretty interesting creature. It supposedly lives in this lake in eastern Iceland, a glacial lake. And just like Nessie, there's a video that people say shows it moving through the water.
I've seen that video, and it does seem pretty real. I mean, people still argue about whether it's authentic or not, but it definitely makes it more mysterious.
Yeah, it does. I think it shows how much we want to prove these things, you know, like to have real evidence of these creatures that seem, well, they seem impossible.
Right. Okay, for our last stop in the sea serpent tour, let's go down to Australia. They have a creature there called the bunyip. It comes from Aboriginal legend.
The bunyip is really interesting because the descriptions are all over the place. Some people say it looks like a seal, while others say it has a face like a dog or a head like a crocodile. Some even say it has feathers.
Wow, it's like the bunyip is like a combination of all the fears and imaginations of all these different Aboriginal groups.
Exactly. It shows how these stories and myths can like reflect the different beliefs of different cultures.
So we've traveled from Massachusetts to California, from Loch Ness to Iceland, and all the way to Australia, exploring all these stories about sea serpents that have fascinated people for centuries. It's almost like every culture has its own monster hiding in the water.
It's true. And whether they're real or not, these creatures remind us how big and mysterious our oceans are. There's still so much we don't know about what's down there.
They make us curious, they spark our imagination, and they remind us that there's still a lot we don't know about the world.
And maybe, just maybe, there are creatures out there that we can't even imagine. Creatures that have adapted to places we haven't even explored yet.
That's a pretty amazing thought. It's exciting, but also kind of humbling to think that we share this planet with creatures that are completely unknown to us.
Yeah, it is. It reminds us that we need to be humble and respectful towards nature. Who knows what we might discover if we keep looking.
Okay, well, on that note, let's go back to our first sea serpent, the Gloucester sea serpent. We've talked about the history, the different descriptions, and even what some experts think. But the question is still there. What do you think?
We've given you all the information, the history, the science, the cultural impact. Now it's up to you to decide what you believe.
Do you think there's a real creature out there, maybe a species we haven't discovered yet? Or do you think it's all just mistaken identity, people's imaginations running wild, and the power of a good story?
Whatever you decide, the Gloucester sea serpent reminds us that the ocean is a huge and mysterious place, full of wonders and secrets waiting to be found.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? The mystery. I mean, what's a good sea serpent story without a little mystery?
Exactly. So next time you're looking out at the ocean, remember those stories about the Gloucester sea serpent and all those other creatures hiding beneath the waves. Keep an open mind, be curious, and never stop exploring the wonders of our world.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of TESS'S Cryptids. We'll be back soon with another, well, with another look at some more mysterious creatures. Until then, happy monster